There are 10,000 ways to die in the 41st millennium, but only one way to live long enough to witness damnation itself, to stand on a world when something new arrives from the warp. The first auguries came in fractured data streams and broken Vox relays. Imperial Auspex arrays high in orbit caught a rift forming, a wound in the void, like the warp itself had drawn breath. From that roiling madness emerged a single ship, vast, black, triangular. Its hull absorbed the light of distant suns. No transponder code, no Imperial sigil. Only a deafening silence across every frequency, broken by a single tone that vibrated the marrow of every living soul below. I am Magos Logistor Kalen Var, Chief of Orbital Analysis on Hive World 9. I was the first to see it arrive, and, throne forgive me, the first to realize it was no daemon thing we had ever catalogued before. If you crave more tales from the dark millennium, I whispered to the terrified acolytes around me, steel your faith and brace your minds. The Emperor protects those who endure. Below, the Hive World spires shimmered under a storm of static lightning. The sky split open as the vessel descended, dragging clouds into a vortex around its massive frame. Vox channels screamed in binary panic, planetary defense guns attempting to lock, astropathic choirs crying blood as their minds bled under psychic interference. The ship's presence was a violation of the Imperium itself, a thing that should not be. Then came the smaller vessels, dagger-shaped transports, engines howling with alien resonance. They dropped through the smog, each exhaling ranks of black-armored soldiers moving in perfect mechanical unison. Their weapons emitted narrow lances of coherent light, burning through armor plate as if it were parchment. The first bastion fell in 12 minutes. Colonel Janus of the 3rd Caronite Infantry reported over Vox before his signal was cut. They move like machine spirits, silent, precise. Last bolts reflect off their armor. They make no sound when they die, if they even can die. Above the slaughter floated a single figure, descending slowly through the ash-choked air. Tall, cloaked, breathing in rhythmic mechanical pulses that reverberated through the Vox spectrum like the heartbeat of some dead god. Around him, debris twisted and shifted, a hovering halo of metal and ruin, moving to the cadence of his will. Pisacres across the Hive World screamed in unison as the warp shuddered. Some burned alive, others went mad, their eyes glowing crimson before exploding into motes of light. What kind of Pisacre could command such focused dominance? None the Imperium had ever known, not since the Primarchs themselves. The figure landed upon the roof of the governor's spire. Imperial storm eagles fired on him point blank. Each shot was deflected by an unseen barrier, energy dispersing into curling smoke. The cloaked invader raised his hand. The gunship froze in midair, crumpled inward like paper, and detonated. The shockwave shattered a kilometer of hab blocks. I watched through Auspex feeds as Vox channels filled with one repeating code from terrified troopers. Shadow Lord, Shadow Lord, Shadow Lord. Within the hour, he walked through the palace gates. Vox logs show the planetary governor begging for mercy, proclaiming loyalty to the Emperor. The figure did not respond. He merely raised a gloved hand, and the governor rose, choking, feet dangling above the marble floor. When the corpse fell, the stranger turned toward the nearest pict recorder. For a fraction of a second, the image caught his face beneath the black mask. Pale, scarred flesh, eyes burning with something colder than hatred. Then the feed went dark. Across the Hive World, the Adeptus Arbitus attempted to form resistance lines. The Manufactorium were seized, their servitors reprogrammed to march alongside the invaders' mechanical ranks. The air was filled with the scream of plasma fire and the mechanical hiss of that impossible breathing. And through it all, I could feel him, his will pressing against every mind like a vice. The Mechanicus's binary prayers faltered as cogitators jammed, machine spirits shrieking in defiance. Vox static carried whispers in a tongue that was not low Gothic. I understood then, this was not a daemon of chaos. It was something older, something disciplined, something that had conquered an entire galaxy before, and had now found another to enslave. And it had chosen Hive World 9 as its first dominion. They called it the Night of 10,000 Echoes. For that was when the Voxnet across Charon 9 filled with overlapping screams. Soldiers, civilians, priests, even servitors, all transmitting on every frequency at once. The invaders had reached the inner hive. The 3rd, 9th, and 22nd Charonite Guard regiments formed barricades along the Prometheum causeway. Lasgon lines glittered like threads of red dawn through the smog. The hive's upper spires still burned, raining molten steel down the levels below. Civilians fled in endless processions, clutching icons of the Emperor, their prayers drowned beneath the thunder of alien engines. Commissar Vorn was not a man easily broken. He had survived the Cadian Gate before its fall, had executed cowards and chaos cultists alike. But even he paused when the black-armored troops appeared from the smoke. So precise, so silent. Their movements were wrong, neither human nor servitor. They fought in perfect synchronization, lines advancing as if one will commanded them all. Vorn lifted his power sword, its blue edge flickering against the ash storm. "Hold the line! For the Emperor! For Charon 9! Artillery thundered, earth-shakers belched smoke and flame, reducing the first wave to burning armor and shattered plating. Cheers erupted through the Vox. Then came the counterstroke. The black soldiers raised their weapons, short, angular rifles with a sound like tearing the air itself. Red lances cut through flak armor and ceramite alike. One shot vaporized an entire gun crew. The guard fought bravely, adapting with machine-like efficiency. Heavy bolters tracked targets with suppressive precision. Tech adepts recalibrated Auspex readings to account for the invaders' energy signatures. Vorn ordered the basilisks to fire in sequence, turning the Manufactorum district into molten ruin. For a moment, the tide slowed. Then the Shadow Lord came again. He emerged through the flames, cloak torn but unburned. Every motion deliberate, every step measured. The air itself bent around him. Vorn ordered every weapon to fire. Dozens of lasguns unleashed overlapping beams, a storm of light. All of it stopped mid-air, crackling like fireflies caught in invisible amber. The figure raised one hand. The entire first rank lifted from the ground, screaming. Their bodies twisted, crushed, armor imploding. A dozen men reduced to broken heaps. Then he threw them, corpses becoming projectiles that tore through their comrades. The vox crackled as the regiment's psyker, Sanctionite Melra, tried to counter with a psychic barrier. She focused her mind, her veins blackening as warp lightning surged through her. For a moment she held him back, a faint shimmering field clashing against the invisible will of the stranger. Then, without gesture or word, he looked at her. Her barrier shattered, her body turned to ash in an instant, her soul consumed like a candle flame snuffed by wind. Across the hive, the Adeptus Arbites formed defensive perimeters around the Administratum towers. Chimeras roared down flooded streets, their treads grinding bone and debris alike. Cadian pattern armor met lines of black war machines that hovered above the ground, repelling bolter fire effortlessly. Some swore the invaders' armor bore no insignia, only the faint reflection of red lenses watching from behind the visors. In the upper hive, I, Magos Kalinhar, continued to record. Every data node that remained operational fed into my cortex implant. I watched as orbital imagery revealed the impossible, the enemy's flagship rebuilding itself. Segments of the hull rearranged, plating shifting like living flesh. The ship drank the energy from our orbital defense grid, converting plasma fire into fuel. Machine spirits inverted, enslaved by a greater will. Within 20 hours, the hive's outer ring had fallen. The enemy had seized the Promethean reactors, redirecting power towards a massive central spire, the ecclesiarchal citadel. There, the Sisters of Battle gathered, under Canoness Race of Varin, their hymns rising against the thunder. Through my lens I saw her, golden armor cracked, her bolter smoking, yet her voice unshaken as she led the remaining regiments in prayer. She was competence incarnate, calm under apocalypse. Her vox sermon reached even my augmetics. Fear is the weapon of heretics. We are the Emperor's wrath made manifest. If the shadow comes, we shall burn brighter. But even faith can tremble, for at that moment the sky turned black again. The invader's ship cast its shadow directly over the citadel. Lightning rippled along its hull as energy gathered at its underside, a storm that crackled with warp resonance. The mechanicus in me understood the impossible physics. This was not teleportation, nor warp drive, nor gravity weapon. This was pure psychic will reshaping reality. Still with us in the darkness? My voice echoed over the channel. Hit that like rune and keep your courage. This tale only grows darker. Then came the beam. A column of red-white fire engulfed the citadel's gate. The surface of the hive buckled, ferrocrete melting into rivers of glass. Thousands screamed prayers, their voices silenced by the roar. And through the inferno strode the black figure once more. Lightsaber ignited, a crimson line against the void. Charon 9 was dying, but faith had not yet broken. Canoness Varin raised her weapon, her voice steady as ever. "Then come, monster, let us see if you bleed." The dawn never came. The ash clouds above Charon 9 were too thick for light to pierce. The world had become a single, choking twilight. And in that dimness, the warlord moved like a god unbound. The black-armored legions spread through the hive in disciplined waves. They advanced with flawless synchronization, each motion guided by an unseen will. Vox intercepts showed no command chatter, no orders shouted across the din. It was as if the same consciousness directed them all, a single hand moving 1,000 bodies. Canoness Ressa Varen held her ground at the steps of the ecclesiarchal citadel, the last bastion of faith in a world drowning in despair. Her armor was scorched, one pauldron torn away by a glancing plasma burst. Still she stood, bolter raised, rosarius crackling. Around her, 24 surviving sisters of battle recited the litany of defiance, their voices raw but unwavering. Through flame, through shadow, through endless night, we endure in His light. The response came not in words, but in pressure. The air itself thickened, dust lifted from the stones, drawn upward as if gravity had forgotten its duty. Ressa felt her armor constrict around her chest. Then he appeared. The stranger, the Shadow Lord, descended the cathedral steps as though gravity bent in reverence. The crimson blade ignited again with its terrible hiss. Around him, the fallen debris floated, orbiting like relics of a shattered world. Ressa opened fire. Blessed bolts streaked toward him, each charged with faith and holy plasma. Every round stopped in mid-flight, spinning, then fell harmlessly to the ground. He moved his gloved hand slightly, and one of her sisters was torn from cover, hurled against a marble pillar with bone-crushing force. This was no witchcraft, as the Inquisition knew it. This was control, cold, absolute, disciplined power. Not the chaotic frenzy of the warp, but a precise manipulation of unseen forces. "Identify yourself," she raised her voice through her helmet vox. "By the authority of the Emperor, I command you, name your allegiance." The figure paused. A mechanical rasp escaped the mask. When he spoke, the voice was low, resonant, translated somehow into perfect Gothic. "There is no emperor here, only power and the will to command it." He reached out. The cathedral's great doors, each weighing hundreds of tons, ripped from their hinges and flew outward. The concussive blast sent sisters sprawling. Ressa fired again, drawing her power sword in her other hand, the blade flaring with azure energy. She charged, not from hope of victory, but because standing still would mean surrendering her faith. Their clash was the meeting of two creeds, the living embodiment of imperial devotion versus a relic from another age. Sparks showered as her power sword met the red blade. For a moment, she held him, her servo muscles strained, pistons hissing. The glow of her rosarius blazed brighter. Then he pushed. The force hit like a titan's blow. She flew backward, armor denting the cathedral wall. Before she could rise, his will pinned her there, invisible hands closing around her throat. Her lenses cracked. The air filled with the shriek of twisting metal as her armor buckled. Still, she met his gaze. You serve chaos. You are its slave." He said, "I serve no god. I destroyed mine." For an instant, something flickered behind that voice. Memory, pain, perhaps even regret. But it was gone before she could grasp it. He turned his attention outward. The hive itself responded. I, Magos Kalen Var, witnessed it through what remained of my orbital sensors. The Shadow Lord extended both hands. Energy gathered above him, visible even through kilometers of ash. It arced through the Hive spires, transforming them into lightning rods. The very air ionized, ferrocrete melted, steel screamed. This was not the warp. My sensors read no immaterium fluctuations. This was raw telekinesis amplified by machinery integrated into his armor. Entire hab blocks tore from their foundations, rising into the air like offerings to some unseen god. When the energy released, those structures fell, crushing thousands beneath. The Hive's top levels collapsed into the depths, burying manufactorums and underhives alike. Commanders tried to rally resistance. One brave artillery captain, Darren Voss, locked his basilisk battery onto the invader's position. His crew worked with precision, each order crisp, each reload perfect. Competence under damnation itself. 3 shells struck true, erupting in brilliant blossoms of plasma. The reading spiked, but the figure remained, surrounded by a spherical distortion field that absorbed the energy entirely. Then, impossibly, one of the shells reversed direction, spinning back through the smoke to obliterate the battery that had fired it. The Emperor's light faltered on Charon 9. The cathedral collapsed inward, its sanctum consumed by fire. When the smoke cleared, only the Shadow Lord remained standing amidst the ruin, his cape torn, but his breathing steady. The sisters lay broken around him, their relics shattered. But not all was lost. Through a shattered archway, Canoness Resaverin crawled free, her voice barely audible through the vox. The Emperor sees you, stranger. You think yourself a god? He will judge you. He turned, the crimson blade extinguishing with a hiss. Then let him come. And with that, the Shadow Lord looked to the sky, as if challenging something far beyond mortal comprehension. The tension builds. Subscribe to witness more tales from the dark millennium. Smoke lay over the ruins of Hive Charon 9 like a funeral shroud. The upper spires had caved in, spilling kilometers of ferrocrete down into the lower levels. The air was thick with burnt oil, incense, and the iron scent of blood. Canoness Resaverin should have been dead. Her armor was fractured, her lungs filled with ash, but the Emperor's hand had not yet withdrawn. Around her, a handful of sisters of battle still lived, 5, maybe 6. They had taken refuge in what remained of the Cathedra Sanctum, a chamber half collapsed and lit only by the embers of sacred candles that somehow still burned. I watched through the last remaining Auspex servitor tethered to my neural array. I had no power left to intervene. My body was fused to a data couch by cooling metal and coagulated blood, but my mind still recorded. I would ensure someone knew what happened here, even if that someone was only the machine god. The survivors had converted the sanctum into a fortress. They barricaded the broken arches with fallen pews, set up firing lines behind shattered altars. Melter guns and storm bolters were cleaned with trembling hands. Every sister worked in grim silence. They all knew they were the last. One, Sister Helene, recited the litany of armor maintenance, her voice shaking but precise. Blessed be the joint, sanctified be the seal, the Emperor's strength within the servo, his will within the trigger. Competence under impossible pressure, the kind that defined the Adepta Sororitas. Even at the end of all things, their rituals remained methodical, exact. Outside, the world trembled with the advance of the enemy. The black soldiers, those automaton warriors, marched through streets that no longer resembled streets, only trenches of molten glass and crushed bodies. The sound of their synchronized steps echoed up the spire. Clack, 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 steady as a heartbeat, unstoppable. Reza stood before the shattered statue of Saint Corona, the city's patron martyr. Her face had been blasted away, leaving only a featureless void where holiness once dwelled. She removed her helm. Her face was pale, streaked with soot and blood. Her eyes were calm. "We hold," she said softly, "until faith itself burns out." The sisters answered as one. "We hold." Then the doors blew inward. A shockwave hurled pews aside like toys. Dust and sacred ash filled the air. Through it strode the Shadow Lord, cloak billowing, crimson blade ignited. The mechanical rhythm of his breathing filled the silence between screams. His presence pressed down on every living thing like a storm. Even the candles flickered and died. Reza's remaining sisters opened fire. Bolter shells exploded against his unseen barrier, sparks flaring in the dim. The invader swept his blade once, a red arc that sliced through gun barrels, through armor, through flesh. Two sisters fell before they even knew they were struck. "Fall back," Reza ordered, diving behind the altar. She slammed her fist onto a rune embedded in the marble. A hidden mechanism clicked. The cathedral's inner reliquary opened, revealing a weapon older than the Hive itself. A multi-melter relic of the Great Crusade, its surface etched with litanies and purity seals. She hefted it onto her shoulder with a grunt. "Blessed is the hand that wields holy flame," she murmured, sighting down the scope. She fired. The blast reduced the air between them to vapor. The heat wave cracked stone and turned the sanctum into a furnace. When the smoke cleared, the Shadow Lord's armor glowed red-hot. His cloak disintegrated, but he still stood. He raised both hands, and the melted fragments of the reliquary rose from the floor, hovering like blades. With a motion, he hurled them outward. One shard pierced Helene's chestplate, another pinned a sister to the wall. Reza screamed, not in fear, but in fury. "In the name of the Emperor!" She charged. Her armor servo screamed under the strain. She swung her power sword in two-handed arc, cleaving through the air. Their blades met again, blue and red, faith and fury. Sparks cascaded like falling stars. For a heartbeat, she drove him back a step. But then came the pressure. Her limbs locked. Invisible tendrils wrapped around her body, freezing her in mid-motion. The sword slipped from her grasp. She felt herself lifted from the floor, boots dangling inches above the stone. "You fight for ghosts. You worship a corpse." Reza forced the words through cracked lips. "And yet it gives me strength." She triggered the last charge in her Rosarius. The relic exploded in a flash of white light, pure, blinding, consecrated energy. The explosion threw both of them apart. The cathedral ceiling collapsed, fire raining down from the upper vaults. The servitor feed died, and for a long moment there was only static. When my sensors reconnected, all I saw was ruin. The Shadow Lord knelt amid rubble, one arm hanging uselessly, armor sparking. Across from him, Reza lay broken but breathing. Her voice was barely audible over the vox. "You cannot rule this galaxy. It already belongs to death." He rose slowly, looked down at her, and, for the first time, did not strike. He turned and walked out into the storm. The sound of his breathing faded into the distance. Quran 9 was finished. The last Vox records show the Black Armies raising a new banner atop the Hive, a crimson symbol of a shattered circle bisected by light, neither imperial nor chaotic, something entirely new. Comment your theories below. What corruption stalks our heroes? Then the transmission ended. The storms cleared 3 days after the fall. What remained of Hive Quran 9 was unrecognizable, a cratered tomb world of ash and twisted iron. The manufactoria lay silent, the spires reduced to slag, the oceans of industry boiled away. Yet, amid the ruin, order re-emerged. The black armored soldiers moved through the wreckage with perfect coordination, erecting new structures from the bones of the old. From orbit, Magos Kalenvar's last surviving servitor recorded the spectacle. He saw a city rebuilt not in the Gothic image of the Imperium, but as a geometric labyrinth, black durasteel towers rising at precise angles, each one connected by glowing conduits pulsing with energy that defied Mechanicus logic. The world itself was changing under the will of a single being. In the heart of that reconstruction stood the Shadow Lord. His armor still smoldered, but his movements were steady. He climbed to the apex of the ruined governor's spire, looking out over the silent corpse of the Hive. The crimson light of his blade ignited again, not as weapon, but as torch, a symbol that cut through the ash. He reached into the air, and the remains of the imperial Aquila statue twisted, reshaping into a jagged emblem of his own design. Where once 2 wings of the emperor had stretched outward, now a single fractured eye stared skyward, the mark of dominion reborn. From my neural array I watched and tried to understand. This being was no demon, no servant of the ruinous powers. He had none of the madness, none of the festering corruption that chaos breeds. Instead, he wielded order itself as a weapon, a mind so disciplined that even the warp bent around him rather than consume him. Was this what the Emperor once sought? Vader, the name his soldiers repeated in encrypted bursts, surveyed his conquest, a world that had resisted him, now silent beneath his command. Yet there was no triumph in his bearing, only the slow, measured rhythm of that mechanical breath. And then the sky shifted. A golden light, faint but pure, shimmered above the clouds. The warp rift that had birthed his arrival began to pulse again, reflecting not red flame, but radiant gold. A voice, vast and ancient, whispered through the void, not sound, but thought. "You are far from your master's throne, child of another age." Vader froze, his gloved hand clenched. For the briefest instant, the fire behind his lenses dimmed. He turned his face toward the heavens where that unseen power dwelled. "I have no master," he said. His voice carried across the ruins, through the open voxnet, through my dying servitor's auditory nodes. The golden light dimmed. The rift sealed itself, leaving only the eternal storm clouds of the 41st millennium. Vader stood alone atop his conquered hive. Around him, the mechanical armies knelt. His empire, born in a day, awaited command. He looked down on the lifeless plains below, at the shattered corpses of those who had defied him. And perhaps, for a moment, he felt the weight of it. Another empire of obedience, another throne built upon fear, another dead world. He deactivated his blade. The darkness swallowed the crimson glow. Then, without looking back, he spoke to the silent air. "This galaxy knows only war. So be it." He turned toward the horizon, where the stars of the segmentum obscurus burned faintly through the ash. The machine legions began to march once more, spreading outward, a tide of black glass and red light, the first seeds of a new dominion unclaimed by any god. And somewhere deep in the data vaults of Mars, my recordings would remain, proof that another conqueror had come, not from the warp, not from the stars of mankind, but from a past where tyranny was born of love, and freedom forged only chains. For in this galaxy, even monsters can find mirrors. Hive Quran 9 never recovered. The Imperium declared it lost, sealing its coordinates under inquisitorial edict. But rumor spread of a warlord clad in obsidian armor, whose breath echoed like thunder, who commanded machines that obeyed without question. Some called him a fallen Primarch, others a shard of the Emperor's own wrath given form. On distant battlefields, soldiers swore they saw his ships in orbit, vast and silent. Planets surrendered without a fight, others resisted and vanished within days. There was no demonic corruption, no heretical creed, only order. Absolute, perfect, merciless order. The Mechanicus sought his technology. The Inquisition feared his creed. The Ecclesiasticer whispered that he was the Emperor's judgment made flesh. None knew the truth, that the darkness of one galaxy had found home in another. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, perhaps the greatest horror is not chaos, but control. The Emperor's light burns eternal, but in its reflection, another light now glows red. The Emperor protects. More stories await.